Hello and welcome into the Cubs on Deck podcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is Greg Huss, and today I am joined by my co-host Bryan Smith. Bryan, how are we doing?
I'm doing great. We're going to get into a lot of news here at the top about the minor leagues that isn't great, and it's been weird because I felt like we spent a year just like patting ourselves on the back about this farm system that kept like looking better and better, and now we have like the realities of baseball setting in, and it's going to be weird that there's going to be like a somber tinge to this episode.
I was gonna say actually, that's not someone. I mean, we get into the weeds on the show, and we weren't planning on talking about this, but I figured I'd toss it out your way. Like, how do you feel about the system as without like digging in deep?
Yeah.
How do you feel like this season's going? Like we progressed far enough along this season. Like, how do you think the system is doing this season overall?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we talked at one point about how it felt like the depth of the system was looking a little shakier than it's been the past couple of years, but that we had those breakouts of like Ballesteros and Triantos taking the step forward that kind of made it work. At the same time, like we're going to talk about Cade Horton and the news around him, but that has happened alongside Pete Armstrong having the best month of his big league career, which, I mean, to me, like, we don't just stop following these guys when they get to the majors. Like the follow through to being the players we wanted them to be is really important. And so Pete having this little breakout month has sustained the good vibes amidst some other sort of unfortunate news.
We're recording this on Monday night like we typically do, and actually I guess not typical. This is back to a pretty normal schedule the past couple of weeks, which has been good. But the Cubs just lost at the major league level, but PCA had a home run tonight, and the home run swing was pretty. Pete's just looked good. He looked comfortable at the plate. He's looked good out there, and I've enjoyed watching him get more comfortable. And I think that like a lot of fans are noticing, right? I think it's like, oh, like this is what we'd hoped. And yeah, it's like it takes a little bit of time, man. Like it takes like half a season, and that's basically what it's taken him is half a season, you know.
Yeah, what's amazing is he's just hitting the ball hard all the time. Like I went to a game in the Cardinals series at Wrigley that he went 0 for 3, but all 3 outs were basically lineouts, and the hard hit rate is just exploded. He's still kind of swinging at everything. He swings just all the time, but he's just finding the barrel of the bat a little more often, and it makes all the difference. So like the cool thing about this month is there's still even growth on top of that when he sort of matures the plate approach a little bit. So he's showing us like sort of the next level of how good he can be, but there's even a level on top of that. And so I'm just excited to keep watching him because, I think people are catching on that he's as fun as we sort of promised he would be for the last couple of years.
Yeah, I'm liking that. That's honestly my favorite part is people like slowly being like, oh, like he's a dude. He's a dude.
Yeah.
We got a full episode this episode, so we'll get into it here. We're covering basically all the big names in the organization here today. We're going to cover some unfortunate injury news right off the top, and then follow that up with some new system rankings that came out from Baseball America and ESPN. We're going to spend a good chunk of this episode today talking about the big 5 hitting prospects in Iowa and talk through, because we haven't put much thought into it, but talk through the ETA for each of these guys and when we might see them in Chicago. And then we're going to wrap up the episode with some pitcher, let's call them deep dives into a few different pitchers in and throughout the system. So let's go ahead and start it off with the rougher news, I guess, the somber news, as you put it. And Cade Horton and Ben Brown, reports came out this past week that both pitchers in separate reports will be shut down for the near distant future, I guess is the best way to describe it. Like it's they're I don't think they came out for either of the guys. Well, I guess for Cade Horton, they came out and said that he's done for the year. For Ben Brown, they did not say he's done for the year, but he is out for a significant amount of time with that neck injury that seems to not be getting any better. But man, it's we got to talk about this because it's our top our top prospect in the organization and a guy that we've been very excited about and is still Ben Brown is still he's not a prospect at this point, but he's still young enough to be on this show, I guess we'll consider. But man, rough news for both these guys.
Yeah, really rough. I mean, Ben Brown, I guess, had the season that at least showed that he can get big league hitters out and showed some really good things. For Cade, it's more of a lost season, unfortunately. I mean, had the good month in Double-A, when he got to AAA, it seemed like the stuff had sort of taken a step back a little bit. I mean, I even think it was at AA to some extent, but he was still getting hitters out. I mean, pitchers were just dominating the Southern League at that point, and I think it kind of overshadowed the fact that he wasn't quite as sharp as he had been last year. And then the injury happens, and you're kind of just spending the summer hoping, okay, when he gets back from injury, I'm betting we're going to see the guy we saw last year. And now that we're not going to see that, it's just it's unfortunate because it really felt there in April like we were going to get a Memorial Day Cade Horton entry in nation, and now we're left wondering, are we going to get a Memorial Day Cade Horton in 2025, or is there going to be an innings limit that's really going to hold him back? It's tricky.
Well, it's weird because you're kind of hoping for two different things entering 2025 with him. It's like you're hoping he can return from injury and perform well in his return from injury, but you're also hoping that he bounces back from the kind of poor-ish performance that we saw from him towards the end of his healthy time in 2024. So like you're hoping for bounce backs in a couple different ways. And like if I was only hoping for one, right? Say Cade Horton dominated in his he had 4 outings in Iowa. In his few outings in Iowa, say he dominated those outings and then he got injured. We'd only be hoping that he can return from injury. And I feel a whole lot better about that, right? Or on the other end, like say that he just kind of he came up and say this timeline was later in the season, he came up to Iowa and he just struggled in his first taste of Iowa, but he's completely healthy. It's like, okay, like he was getting his first taste of Iowa. That's fair. That's fine. But it's the fact that you got both of them thrown into the mix, and it's like, it's tough. It enters 2025 season. It's like I if I can turn this to like how I kind of view him in like terms of rankings in the system, he's not my surefire number one prospect in the system, and that's I think that was not necessarily like it was the case at midseason for me, but I had him as my number one. But like I could see arguments for Owen Caissie, I could see arguments for Matt Shaw, I could see arguments for really many of the other top 6 guys in the organization as being the number one ranked prospect in the system. Now it just makes that conversation a little bit easier,
Well, does it make it easier or does it make it trickier? I guess that's the question, because now it's like a hodgepodge. Now, I mean, the fun thing I think about ranking prospects is not when we all agree on who the top 2 are like we did last year. Like it was so easy. Like there was no conversation to be had over like how do you rank the top of the system. Now I think it is tricky, but in like a more fun way, because we can have as many as like 4 guys that different people have at the top.
It reminds me of, what was it, when we had Nico, Miguel Amaya was pre-injury, and Brennan Davis was just starting to take off.
And you looked at any Marquez?
And Braylon Marquez, yeah. And you looked at those rankings, like you could see any of those guys ranked number one if you looked at my list versus your list versus Todd's list, Zoom at like whoever, pipeline, go through the list. It's like you had different rankings of those top 3 or 4 guys, no matter where you look. And it's very similar to that, hopefully with better outcomes for each of our current top prospects compared to that grouping of guys that we saw back in 2018, probably, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, if there's one, I guess, good thing for the organizational health, like as far as Cade is concerned, is that like they didn't get to the point where he just got to the major leagues and got hurt, which would have meant that he's on the 40-man roster all off season, then eating up one of those spots. Since he never got to the 40-man and he isn't needed to be added this winter to be protected from the Rule 5 draft, he has another year for that. They sort of keep that spot open that they otherwise were probably projecting would be his. And so, I mean, that's a really, really sort of small note and does not like make me feel any better about the fact that Cade had this setback. But, I think it's worth noting because it does just mean the Cubs will have sort of one extra piece of depth as a result.
Well, I mean, let's talk about, we're going to talk about ETAs later on with a lot of the hitting prospects, but let's talk about Cade and like what this might mean for his timeline to Chicago, because I think what this sets up is my weird love, which is having a pitching prospect come up and get work out of the bullpen before ultimately becoming a starting pitcher, right? I think that like he's a really good case where like he could follow that. Cade Horton is a really good case of he could follow that Justin Steele, I compared him to like Corbin Burns or Brandon Woodruff or Freddie Peralta that we saw Craig Counsell use in the Milwaukee Brewers bullpen and then rotation for a few years, where it's like, hey, like we're gonna need to see like Cade Horton won't be ready to throw 150 innings like we didn't think he could this year, but he definitely won't be ready to throw 150 innings next year in Chicago. So it's like, all right, you're at a weird scenario where he will likely be talented enough to be in Chicago at some point next year, but he will not be stretched out, or that's not the right word. He will not have the endurance enough over the course of a season to log as many innings to be in the rotation in Chicago. So like, to me, it becomes pretty straightforward that next year you might see him in the Chicago bullpen. And like, when we say that, I point to guys like Corbin Burns, Freddie Peralta, Brandon Woodruff, Justin Steele, guys like that, because like I emphasize, I do this, I feel like multiple times every single year. That's like, just because a guy makes his debut and spends his rookie season or even his second season in the bullpen at the major league level, he does not need to stay there. He can ultimately get converted back to the rotation once he builds up innings, once he adds a pitch to his repertoire, if that may be the situation at hand. But I think that might be the situation we're looking at with Cade Horton.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. It would make sense for him to have a pretty slow ramp up next spring. Maybe that starts with like a couple innings at a time in Iowa. I mean, he'll probably start those games, but maybe he only pitches 2 to 3 innings. And then the Cubs would have an interesting choice, right? Do you then move him up to the majors to do that 2 or 3 inning thing out of the bullpen and sort of help lengthen out the bullpen at that time? Or do you move him into the Iowa rotation, get to 5-6 innings, and then when he's ready for the majors, it's like, okay, do we put him back into the bullpen? Do we like put him in the rotation? There's like an awkwardness that sort of in between situation creates. But I think he's like competitive enough that like if he gets a shot at the majors, if he's just been starting for maybe 6 weeks in Iowa, pitching 5-6 innings at a time, and they're just like, hey, we want you to come up and pitch 2 innings at a time for a couple weeks, like I think he'd be like, sign me up. So I would bet he's limited to 100 to 120 innings next year. And so they're just going to have to keep that in mind. And the real question will be like, is the first outing happening April 5th, or is the first outing happening, more into like late April, early May, and that'll sort of inform the length of the season to some extent.
I think you said it right at the beginning that we're going to be entering another season where it looks pretty similar to what we expected coming into this year with Cade, right? It's right. We kind of expected 130-ish innings from Cade Horton this year. A little bit less is the expectation next year, probably. We had hoped that he might start off the year in AAA Iowa. He started in AA, obviously. But like he probably could have, based on his results, he probably could have started in AAA and been fine in terms of like where he started off the year. He'll start off next year in AAA Iowa, waiting to see what his role is in Chicago, just like it was this year. Like it's going to look a lot similar in 2024 or 2025 as it did in 2024. But another guy whose kind of role kind of bounced around a little bit, like I said, was Ben Brown. And him being out this amount of time, I think, again, leans him more and more towards the bullpen aspect of his career. But I don't think you can rule out a move back to the rotation at some point for Ben Brown.
Yeah, if I were the Cubs, I would go into next season saying, Ben, we're going to put you in the bullpen. We might lengthen it out to 3-4 innings at times, but we want you to prepare as a reliever. And if that sort of naturally finds his way, if he sort of flows back to the rotation, great. But if this is just sort of the entryway into a bullpen career that leads to like he has the stuff to be a closer. So if then like the natural path is to move to closer, like also great. And so that's how I would play it now. It's just hard. It's going to be hard to sort of, he's showed too much major league readiness for me to want to have them like start him in AAA as a starter next year. Like that just doesn't interest me that much. Like now you're risking like stretching a guy out, like, and maybe you create another injury in doing that. Like just put him in the big league bullpen and then make decisions based on how that goes is how I would view it with Ben.
Any overarching thoughts on Cade Horton, Ben Brown, and Jordan Wicks, your top three starting pitcher or top three pitching prospects entering the year, all missing a significant amount of time due to injury. Besides, this kind of sucks.
The thing that jumps out to me is that all three guys ended up having more serious injuries than they were diagnosed. And two of those guys, their diagnoses were like in question for a while. I mean, Ben Brown still sounds like it's in question. I think that like end of season meetings between Jed Hoyer and his different staffs, like the training staff is going to have to answer for that. And, I certainly don't want to come on here and fire anybody on a podcast. Like there's nuanced things, and I'm certainly no armchair doctor, but man, those are going to be tough meetings, because those were awkward situations that were all bunched together. And not only is it unfortunate, it's just like I don't know, too coincidental maybe.
Yeah, I was gonna say that doesn't. You don't see that happening with one player very often, let alone two and then three. So it's just awkward and weird and unfortunate for the players, unfortunate for the organization, and just a strange situation all around.
Yeah.
Let's go from one downer to another, which is that I mentioned the Cubs system. The both ESPN and Baseball America came out with their farm system rankings. They ranked each system 1 to 30 in all of baseball, and the Cubs came outside of the top 10 on both of those rankings. I believe those ESPN had them ranked 12th, and Baseball America had them ranked 11th. I don't know, man. It seemed a little low to me considering their top end talent. Like we've said before, the depth is clearly not there in the same way. I think I was a little less surprised seeing ESPN rank them and Kyler McDaniel rank them at 12, because we know the way that he kind of assembles those rankings is based on like player values or player valuation, not even player value, like player valuation in terms of like money wise for each of the systems. And it pays off having that depth in the organization as far as his ranking. I know all rankings, but especially his rankings. Right. Because we've seen years in the past where the Cubs they did not have that top end talent, but they're pretty damn deep. And when everybody else was ranking the Cubs system in like 25 to 30, Kylie was kind of around like 15 to 20 on those. I don't have the numbers pulled up in front of me, but like it seemed like he was higher in the organization then because of the depth. So I'm not as surprised seeing Kyler McDaniel rank him 12th, but I don't know, man. You have 7 top 100 prospects. You could argue Just Baseball just ranked Cam Smith in the top 100 prospects in all of baseball. Yeah. You could make the case that the Cubs have 8 top 100 prospects, and not being a top 10 organization at that point, it seems strange to me.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I feel like I would have them somewhere between 8th and 12th, just sort of eyeballing it. I always sort of, that's how I answer farm system rankings. They're like, in part, I think that they're kind of silly to do because I think everybody uses a different rubric, and but nobody actually sort of publishes what the rubric is. Like, how important is having top 50 prospects? How important is having your number 12 prospect be a pretty good player? Like, everyone handles that a little differently. What I would say jumps out to me is that I don't think the Cubs have a slam dunk top 30 in baseball prospect. Mm-hmm. And I don't think the Cubs have particularly great depth past number 8 in the system. And so it makes sense for me that they're going to get dinged a little bit. They do, of course, like they look really good from 3 to 8. Like, mm-hmm. not a lot of farm systems have, players 5, 6, 7, for instance, what the Cubs have. But like that's 1 point in their favor. Mm-hmm. There's other things that I think we have to recognize are less good. But at the same time, they just graduated Pete Armstrong. They just graduated Ben Brown, Jordan Wicks. Like, you're gonna drop in the rankings when you graduate, guys, and that doesn't mean like the development apparatus of your organization is like more flawed than it was last year when they were number 1 or 2. Like, what you want is like a flow where you gradually move up. Then you graduate, guys, and you come down a little bit. You hopefully don't go all the way down to 28, but like you naturally go down, and then you come back up again. Like that's how this stuff is always going to go. And, unfortunately, like we didn't have like the star performance this year, maybe outside Michael Busch, that makes it feel like we really earned that number 2 ranking. But I guess it was going to happen. It was going to flow back downwards. And the exciting thing is, like, there is space for it to flow back up if a couple of these studs in Iowa, like, show that they should be top 20 guys.
Yeah, the system is really strange. And you're right. The Cubs have 8 players that are basically ranked between like 31 and 125 ish in all of baseball, right?
Yeah.
You have nobody in the top 30, basically.
Yep.
And you really don't after that like 125 ranking, you really don't have anybody in the top like 300 in all of baseball.
Right.
Probably, right? I mean, like, I think
maybe Wiggins.
I was going to say Jackson Wiggins is the next guy, and is Jackson Wiggins top 300 in all of baseball? I don't know. I'm sure some people would have him there, but you could make the argument that he's not even top 300. So, like, that's a big gap, dude, of having nobody between 125 and 300.
Yep.
And I know we're getting like awfully specific with 300 there, but that's not my point. I guess my point is that, like, there is that big drop off afterwards, and the system is just really weird right now. It's really strange. It needs some breakouts at the lower levels. We could talk for hours about those guys. We will not here today, but yeah, it's just a weird organization or a weird system as it stands right now. I wouldn't call it bad, and Kyler McDaniel and the folks at Baseball America are not calling him bad, right? They're saying it's top half in all of baseball, which is, I'll take that with the amount of young guys in Chicago and the level of talent the Chicago Cubs have. I'm saying that I'm being very careful. Like, they're not obviously a playoff team, maybe, but I'll take the 11th ranked system in all of baseball right now, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, let's get into some player-specific stuff here with ETA predictions, right? So there are 5 big hitters in the Iowa Cubs lineup. That is Owen Caissie, Moises Ballesteros, and now Matt Shaw, James Triantos, and Kevin Alcantara. We talked about the big 3 getting promoted up from Tennessee up to Iowa last week on the show with Sam Wiederhaft. But those 5 guys, I think that the constant question, the question I'm getting more than anything else is, like, when are we seeing these 5 guys in Chicago? And it's, when am I seeing Owen Caissie? And then someone's asking, when am I seeing Moises Ballesteros? And then someone's saying, when am I seeing Matt Shaw? It's like it's never like, when am I seeing these 5 guys come up at the same time? But I think it's a worthwhile conversation to have on when we might see these dudes in Chicago. And I mentioned to you before we started recording, like, I honestly haven't put much like direct thought into each of these guys individually,
right?
But it might be worthwhile just to kind of talk it out. Would you want to start up at the top, start player by player here?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, let's start with Owen Caissie, because he's the guy. Owen Caissie is the guy who's been in Iowa this entire season long. He's putting up good numbers across the board this season, right? Over the course of 95 games, he has a 270 batting average, a 363 OBP. He is OPSing over 800 in Iowa as a 21 in his age 21 season. So he is 5.5 years younger than the average player, in the International League, which is crazy. So
yeah,
what's your thought process on Owen Caissie here?
Okay, so Owen Caissie has to be added to the 40-man roster this winter. So when a player is in that position, it feels very natural to have him play with the big league team in September, or August, kind of the same situation that Pete Armstrong ran into last year. So there's no sort of argument against it organizationally. Like, if they feel like his bat would help the team, there's nothing sort of standing in the way for that reason. Now, the other thing that I would point out is that Caissie was a little banged up in the middle of July, missed 2 weeks with an injury. And since he's come back, it has not been great. He's played in 19 games and he has a 240 batting average. But the weirdest thing, the thing that we've never said about Owen Caissie his whole time in the minors, he has a 266 on base. He's walked just 3 times in 19 games since he returned, including going 9 games without a walk for the first time in his minor league career. So he's in the middle of this little like mini slump that he's going to need to adjust back to. It would, right now, I would say sort of not on the major league radar. One of those guys that like an injury would have to occur where they would need a bat. I think it's totally fine if he spends the whole year in AAA and doesn't come up and gets added to the 40-man roster and just sort of projects to be a debut midseason next year. But also a guy who could get absolutely on fire the next couple weeks and would also make sense logically as a September call up. So, yeah, I don't know. He's sort of in between. He's probably the one that's the most like, I could see it going either direction.
Yeah, what I've been saying when I've been a guest on podcasts and people have asked why is Owen Caissie not up, I keep going back to I and correct me if you feel otherwise, let me know. But I feel like we haven't seen Owen put everything together at the same time in AAA.
Yeah. Yep.
He's put up great numbers this year. He has shown the ability to put bat on ball. He's shown off the power for stretches. He's taken walks for long stretches. He's done different things at the plate. He's done all the things at the plate. He's cut down his strikeouts for stretches of time as well. But like he hasn't done all of them at the same time. Like it's not all there. And I want to see everything all there at the same time before he comes up to Chicago. And that may not be this year. I'm curious, like if we enter 2025, if he gets reassigned back to AAA, which I think is absolutely an option for going into next year, how long it takes him at that point to then put it all together, only playing in his age 22 season in AAA Iowa, right? So like he'll be added to the 40-man roster regardless, obviously this offseason. But I think that like I'm willing to slow play Owen Caissie more than probably all four of the other guys that we're going to talk about today. And which is weird because the Cubs have been very, very aggressive, I felt like, in Owen Caissie's opening day assignments each season he's been in the system. I thought they were aggressive with assigning him to South Bend a few years ago, aggressive last year in Tennessee, and aggressive this year in Iowa. So it would be out of the ordinary, right? Slow playing him, sending him back to Iowa next year, and making sure that he puts everything together in a way. I don't know. I could see an ETA for Owen Caissie like mid next season and be okay with that.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, what you want guys to get to the majors by like banging the door down in AAA. And I know prospects are a lot better covered than they were 10 years ago, but like Chris Bryant destroyed the door by banging on it in AAA. Jorge Soler's numbers were absolutely ridiculous. Kyle Schwarber the same way. Like these Wilson Contreras same way. Like these were guys that were leaving absolutely no doubt with their play on the field that they needed to be in the majors. That's just not the case. Like you said with Owen, good season, but has not had 3 weeks that are, just undeniable. Really hasn't had a stretch that like Alexander Canario had last year that had everyone saying like, let's try him in the major leagues. Like we just haven't had that sort of searing red hot stretch yet. Now we reserve the right to change our minds if this happens in the second half of August. Yeah. Like I think you and I will come on the show and be like, call him up, you cowards.
Yeah.
But if it kind of continues along this pace, then like I'm absolutely like, I think the right play is Iowa out the gate next year. And again, just let him demand and leave no doubt that he's ready.
I think he's probably, if we're sitting here and like making predictions, which I don't know if we're going to do this for each of these guys, but like Owen Caissie is the hardest person to make a prediction for, I think, because you're right. Like if he just kind of slowly continues to develop, slowly, I put quotes around slowly. If he slowly continues to develop, then maybe the ETA is like August of next year. But if he goes on this hot streak for 3 weeks, then it could be next month, and that would also be fine. So he is I think the most unique case of these 5 guys. But I'll be keeping an eye on him just putting everything together at the same time here. So I don't know. Do you want to make a prediction there?
As it stands today, I would say he does not get called up this year.
I'm gonna say I'll say July of next year. I'll say July 2025 is my.
Yeah, I think I'd probably say June. So
yeah. Okay. Let's go to the second guy that I probably received the most commotion, and that is Moises Ballesteros. He obviously has been having an incredible season this year. He is in AAA, and I think that one of the reasons why the shouts for Moises Ballesteros were so loud for so long was because of the catching performance in Chicago, right?
Yeah.
And that worked out at the exact same time where they were really struggling. The catchers were in Chicago at the same time as Moises Ballesteros got promoted to Iowa. Like that combination was perfect for everybody to be shouting for Moises. And you and I both were for a stretch there as well.
Yep.
But Miguel Amaya has been pretty damn good for the past couple months now, month and a half now or so. And Ballesteros has been pretty good, but I wouldn't say incredibly good in Iowa. Where do you stand right now with Mo?
I've changed tunes a couple times. I was advocating for his call up when it felt like the Cubs were dropping out of the race, and then as they were sort of like backing their way back into the race like they have been lately, I was like, okay, it probably makes sense. You don't have to add him to the 40-man roster. Like, don't have him eat up a spot, man. And then, the Iowa team just had their first week, and they were in Omaha with all 5 of these guys in the lineup. And Ballesteros, to me, looked easily the best of the 5, at least at the plate. Alcantara had a great week, and we'll get into him, but Ballesteros just looked very professional. I think he struck out twice or something all series, walked more than he struck out, hit a couple homers, including just a bomb, or I think both of the home runs were on breaking balls, if I remember right.
Yeah. Yep. I believe so.
I did tweet out that I saw in the sort of advanced stats that he's really struggled on 4-seam fastballs, which is so bizarre to me because like 4-seam fastballs in AAA are not particularly good pitches, and 4-seam fastballs in the majors are elite pitches. And so it's like, okay, is that like a weakness that I never really noticed that is sort of like showing now, but could show even more problematically in the majors? That has me a little concerned. He's another one that you can sort of make the case for both. What I will say is he's got a 1,000 OPS over his last 12 games in AAA. So if we're saying that Owen Caissie has not shown that sustained stretch of knocking on the door, like I think Ballesteros might be in the middle of showing us that, and it'll be interesting. Like, it's an interesting decision if the Cubs fall completely out of it, and it's an interesting decision if the Cubs are actually kind of in it, because you could make a case that he is the best offensive catching option in the organization. And if you're really trying to win a game tomorrow, like, I guess I'd ask you directly, if the Cubs were playing game 163 tomorrow, like, is he who you would want to be the catcher if sort of the organization's future depended on just one win? Or are you doing Christian Bethancourt or Miguel Amaya? Like, who are you writing down if there's no 40-man roster concerns and you just have to win Game 7 of the World Series tomorrow?
I think I'm putting down Miguel Amaya, not Moises Ballesteros.
Yeah.
I think that my thinking with that, well, I mean, it's a little loaded because I think that if the Cubs are making are in that scenario, the rest of the bats in the lineup have continued to produce, and so you're relying on you're not relying as much on the catching position to produce offense. So that's unrelated to the actual players themselves. But like, I don't know, man. I think that Miguel Amaya has proven enough that like over the course of, like I said, a month and a half or so, that like he can do something at the plate. And I just believe that Miguel is better behind the plate than Moises Ballesteros. And I know that there are still mixed reports on Moises Ballesteros, the catcher, like behind the plate.
Yeah.
I do think he looks better this year than he did last year. I'll say that. I will also say that the arm is really good. Like Moises Ballesteros has a good arm. Does he have a good transfer? I don't know, but he has a good arm. And so I would have too many concerns about Moises Ballesteros being slotted in behind the plate at the major league level with the game on the line right now. I'd have to put him at DH. If I could find a way for the whole lineup to make sense in him DHing, then yeah, like I'd consider that. But if I'm choosing a catcher right now to start game 163 or game 7 of the World Series or whatever it is, it's Miguel Amaya.
Yeah, and like that gets into an awkward fit question, right? Because like we've seen reports that the Cubs look to upgrade the catching position not just for this year but for the long term at the trade deadline, which signals that they don't probably think that Moises Ballesteros is like 100 game a year catcher. Like I bet the Cubs think that he can catch 30 games. And I think that, and I know that they believe he can hit in the majors. But are you really going to call a guy up to the majors a year before you have to put him on the 40-man roster to be a guy who's like a once-a-week catcher and 3 times a week DH? Like, I just don't like that's not a big enough role to sort of change like organizational depth on.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I think that you're right. Going back to kind of like are the Cubs competing at the end of this year? Are the Cubs way out of it at the end of this year? That's good. I think if the Cubs are out of it, I don't think we see Moises Ballesteros. I don't think they burn I don't think the Cubs will burn an off season not needing to put him on the 40-man roster.
Yeah,
to do that. And but if they are competing, if it's coming down to the wire at the end of the season, I could see a scenario where they're just like, we need the best bats in Chicago. And whether or not Moises Ballesteros, the tricky thing is they're gonna have to call him up to play, right? He wouldn't come up just because he's a good bat and then sit behind Miguel Amaya or not DH every game. Like he would be playing every game, and I think it'd be as a DH. I don't think it'd be as a catcher. So I don't know.
His best odds of getting called up might just be a catching injury, and like a catching injury with the Cubs like 3 games out of the wild card.
Yeah,
that might be the way that it happens.
Well, I mean, there's not many catchers there that the Cubs can go to. I don't know who's on the free agency market, but if Miguel Amaya or Christian Bethancourt go down with an injury, then like, yeah, if it's tomorrow, it might be Moises Ballesteros, right?
Yeah.
I mean, who else could it possibly be?
Yeah, I don't even, some of the times you see the lineup in AAA and you're like, who?
The backup catcher in Iowa right now is what William Simonette. Is that how do you pronounce his name? He was the guy that we signed midway through the season, right?
I'm proud that you said it first.
I'm trying to pull it up here, but
Simonite.
Okay, whatever it is. Because Bryce Wyndham just retired, and it's just like I actually think it probably would have been Bryce if there's an injury right now. I know it seemed like that was the case a month ago, and then 2 months ago, and then 3 months ago, and 4 months ago. But I think it actually would have been the case, and unless there's somebody in the free agency pile that they can sign, which is probably the route that they would end up going. I don't know. Long-winded way of saying is that like if there's an injury, it's got to be Moises, I'd imagine. If it's a stretch run at the end of the season, it's probably Moises. I think that Moises has the best chance of these 5 guys we're talking about here to get the call up this season. That's my take.
I do not. So
okay.
let's
go. We haven't talked about the guy yet. Okay, let's go to let's transition over here to Matt Shaw. I'm sure is who you want to talk about next, right? Matt Shaw just called up. He in his first week in Iowa did not
go well.
Very well at the plate. I'm pulling up the stats here. His first week in Iowa, he put up a
2 for 19.
2 for 19. Yep. 2 for 19. That's a 397 OPS for Matt Shaw. Not great, obviously, but his first week there. What are your thoughts on Matt Shaw, the future Chicago Cub?
Yeah, I mean, so I think back about Nico Hoerner's debut when I think of Matt Shaw. Nico Hoerner, the context of that debut is, he's playing in AA. His AA season finishes. He goes home. His season is over. He's kind of getting ready for the offseason part to start. Cubs, who have sort of playoff ambitions, have every shortstop in the universe that plays in the organization all go down with injury at the same time. With no other options, and the team in San Diego, Nico Hoerner up like in California where he lives, they call him down and he comes down and shows that he's a true professional. And that's sort of how that's like the weirdest context, I think, for a top prospect, like almost debuting that I ever remember. And, we're like in that zone with Matt Shaw to me, where like if the Cubs have playoff ambitions and Nico Hoerner gets hurt, Matt Shaw has a really good argument for being like the guy who can help you get through. If Isaac Paredes gets hurt, Matt Shaw kind of has the argument for doing it. If Dansby gets hurt, Nico goes over to shortstop. Matt Shaw is kind of that guy. And so there's so many sort of injury outcomes where like I could see myself being like, hey, if you're serious about trying to be good, like this is a guy that would not get that overwhelmed by big league pitching and like might just run into a really hot stretch and help you win ball games. And so there are a lot of potential injury outcomes that lead to big roles for him where, with Ballesteros, for instance, like, we're basically talking about like if one specific guy gets injured, then that's the scenario where he comes up. With Shaw, I could see it being 3 guys getting injured to open the door for him.
And I think that's a good point that you brought up where if the Cubs are competing for a playoff spot at the end of the year, you're not calling up Miles Mastrobuoni for that push. Yeah. Right? Like if this is in June, same scenario, same everything, like Matt Shaw's up in AAA, whatever, and it's in June, then yeah, I think it's Miles Mastrobuoni because like he can play all those positions. He can hold his own in Chicago to a certain degree, but like Miles Mastrobuoni is not going to go out there and get hot for 3 weeks in OPS 900.
Right.
Matt Shaw has a chance to do that. And it's like, you're right. If there is an injury towards the end of this year and they need a playoff push, not a hold things steady, the playoff push is Matt Shaw. The hold things steady is Miles Mastrobuoni. And I think they can go the Matt Shaw route for sure. That's a good, I honestly hadn't considered that element of it, but,
I mean, the other thing, I mean, we keep talking about it, but we should just say it. Like the Cubs being in this awkward middle spot creates such like tough choices around everything they're doing. Like they don't know whether they're in the playoff race or not at like a front office level. And that makes every decision pretty tricky because you kind of have to consider the right now a lot, but also like, they're a 4 to 9% chance to make the playoffs depending on how each of these days goes lately. And so like, you can't just have winning tomorrow be 100% literally the only concern.
The Chicago Cubs did not want to call up Nico Horner back then for his MLB debut. The Chicago Cubs surely do not want to have to call up Matt Shaw this year, right? Like that's kind of like things have to hit the fan in order for Matt Shaw to get called up. And so I think, yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you that Matt Shaw is up there with Moises Ballesteros. I'm not willing to concede that in my opinion that Matt Shaw is more likely than Moises Ballesteros. I think it's close. I think
we have not gotten to the player yet that I think is most likely to get called up this season.
Okay. Let's go to the next guy here then. Let's go to James Triantos.
0% James Triantos gets called up this season.
What are
you try to make the argument to me. Like, let me be a devil's advocate and you make the argument. What is the path that James Triantos has to get called up this season? To me, it's very clear he is there until the last day of the AAA season. They want to expose him to this level a bunch. I think they're really positive about the steps that Triantos has made this season. To me, no chance 2024 is in play.
And it's mostly because like if everything goes wrong, it's Matt Shaw, right? Like that's if everything goes wrong plus Matt Shaw is injured, I think that right? Like that's got to be the scenario.
And then it's Mastrobuoni.
and then it might be Mastrobuoni. I don't know, man. What if James Triantos? What if James Triantos? Yeah, because you're right. Like, what if he puts up the same numbers he put up in Tennessee? And it's like at that point, well, I guess the numbers he puts up in Tennessee are it was harder to put up a 782 OPS in Tennessee than it would be in Iowa. I don't know. What if he puts up an 875 OPS in Iowa and Matt Shaw puts up a 550 OPS over the next month?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. I don't think an OPS in the 8s lets you jump Mastrobuoni in line. Yeah. I think it would have to be higher than that. And for James to be higher than that means like And like, I don't think this is impossible, but like he's got to hit 350 or better to have an OPS in the nines right now with the state of like power in his game right now.
Mm-hmm.
And like, man, I
He's
mean,
not
if the guy goes
he's
out
not
and
gonna
hits 375 for a month,
yeah, he's not gonna find the pop all of a sudden here in the last
right?
month and a half of the season. I think there's more pop in his bat, but he's not
Yeah.
gonna just it's not gonna come out of nowhere in the last month and a half. So you're right. He does have to bat literally 350 in order for that to work.
He is a, I would think if we're talking ETAs, like the most sort of likely ETA to me is like August 2025, plays most of the season in AAA. Next year is a guy who November 2025 would be when he would have to be added to the 40-man roster. And so like it's kind of the situation Owen Caissie's in this year where it's like he's a natural midseason addition if he's doing well, but you don't have to rush it. And so my ETA for James would be basically July, August, September of next year.
Yeah, that's mine. That's mine on him making Chicago. My alternative route would be opening day for next year for the Toronto Blue Jays.
Right.
Like I think that he's in a unique situation. James Triantos is in an incredibly unique situation.
Yes.
Where you got a log jam of middle infielders. He hasn't played third base. He hasn't played the outfield in the way that I thought that they would try him out there.
Yeah.
You're behind Matt Shaw. You're obviously behind Nico Horner. You're similar production wise at the plate than Nico Horner.
That's what I was gonna say. I mean, like they're very similar guys in terms of strengths and weaknesses, and so like, are you really gonna have a minor league dev guy like banging on the table like, James Triantos is like markedly better than Nico Horner. We need to like open up a hole for that. Like, there are probably guys that believe that, and I can see the argument for it, but like they're really similar skill sets.
Yeah, you're not gonna trade away Nico. I've seen this. You're not gonna trade away Nico Horner for a rookie James Triantos because you're not gonna recoup that offensive production. Not that Nico's
Right.
out there putting together great numbers, but in his rookie or second season, James Triantos isn't likely gonna do that. As much as I like James, I think James is a great player, and I'm
I think
really
you're
excited for James
saying
to make his
like
debut.
if you're trying to make the playoffs in 2025, which they reportedly are, that's not a move you make. If you're trying to like just be thinking about 2028 or something, like maybe that is a move you would make. But
if you're trying to produce, if you're trying to have a second baseman that has for the first few years slightly worse production than Nico Horner, if he has a little bit worse production than Nico Horner but gain more years of control and
right.
trade Nico Horner, then then James Triantos is your guy. That just doesn't match up with a let's compete now in 2025.
Right.
So
if the Cubs were the Marlins, it would be a different conversation, but
if the Cubs were the Marlins, it'd be a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Nico would not be in the organization, and James Triantos would be up. Okay. Last guy is apparently your guy as the most likely to be called up this year, Kevin Alcantara. Is it the 40-man roster thing?
I mean, it is, and I think that matters more than most fans think. I also think he's like he's a somewhat natural fit for the roster, especially like if you think about what do you want as a September call up. You want a guy who there are very clear matchups where he could play. It's a guy that could come in the 7th, 8th, or 9th inning and improve the team around by either adding something with legs or glove. He's sort of a natural fit with that. Like the Cubs are pretty left-handed in the outfield, especially like the days that you have PCA and Bellinger and Mike Tauchman, like a bunch of guys that like, you have a tough lefty in the middle innings, like might make sense to get Jaguar out there. I think his defense is just looking so good lately.
It's so good, dude.
Yeah, he's playing a ton of center field and looks so good. I wish they'd play him in right field more because I just am so curious what that would look like. I think there is a chance he's the best right fielder in the organization defensively, and he's like hasn't played right field in months. So that is something that they should start doing. And like he's also maybe of the 5 guys we've talked about here, like he is the guy that if he had a 1200 OPS for like 2 weeks, it would shock me the least. Like he just, when he catches fire, it becomes this like absolute inferno, kind of like, when we talked about Canario's August last year, like that's just what Kevin is like as a baseball player. And so if like with all these guys, we're sort of talking about their major league debut coming as a result of stars aligning, like I see the, not to get like astronomer on you, but I just see the stars aligning most likely when I look at what's going on with him.
He also, again, if we're talking about how injuries might benefit a prospect, he benefits off the fact that Canario is injured, that Matt Mervis is injured, that there's been a lot of injuries at that AAA level. BJ Murray obviously not having a great year this year, but like he's injured. Luis Vasquez injured, like the entire infield and I know he's an outfielder, but that is an injured roster in Iowa, so that obviously helps them because those are all 40-man rosters. All those guys I just mentioned, all 40-man rosters. So being one of the few healthy people on the 40-man roster, not on the Chicago roster, that alone benefits Kevin Alcantara. Add in the fact that he's been red hot since he came up to Iowa. Yep. That doesn't hurt.
Yeah, and the other thing I would point out is like if they're kind of in the playoff race, he has the most magnetic personality of the 5 guys that we've discussed. And like, if you're talking about adding a guy to a locker room who's just going to like lift spirits by being around, which like honestly kind of does have to be a consideration. I think when like the modern rules are you get 2 September call-ups, like in the olden days, like you just call up 10 guys and like, you sort of let the room be what it is. When you only get 2, like I think you have to consider everything. And he is a guy that like would bring a lot of joy to the room. He's a guy that like when he made a big play would turn and really like fire up the dugout in the way that PCA sometimes does too. I kind of want it to happen. I think it would be really fun. I think it'd be good for Kevin to just spend a couple weeks there, seeing what professionals in the major leagues like look like and how they act every day. Like that's what I want for September call-ups too. And if you ask me today, the most likely guy to debut in 2024 is him, which is very funny given, where the state of these guys was 6 weeks ago.
I think you sold me. I think I've been sold on Kevin Alcantara being that guy. It's weird, right? Like I think that like circumstances kind of go his way a little bit. Moises Ballesteros has been kind of consistently knocking on the door. I think like you mentioned guys that are like knocking the door down to make their major league debut. That's what you said earlier. Right. And it's like I agree with that, and I think that Moises Ballesteros has not knocked it down, but maybe he's
the closest.
Yeah, he's ramming into the door a little bit harder than most.
Right.
Not knocking it down quite yet.
He's knocking.
He's knocking. I think that Kevin Alcantara, the circumstances are they may just open the door for him. He won't have to knock the door down.
Yes.
So I think that might be the difference.
Yeah, it's more we're talking about like when I talk about him in the majors, he would not be called up to play even 4 starts a week,
Mm-hmm.
If Ballesteros gets called up, it means he's playing a lot.
Yeah.
Alcantara, like, he might get 6 plate appearances a week, but like there are other things he's doing.
Last thing I'll ask you on this topic, who of these 5 guys do you think is the most likely to get up and stay up whenever they are called up?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. Matt Shaw, I think. James Triantos might be the other one.
Yeah, I was going to say James Triantos.
Triantos is just, he's the least likely to go up and strike out 50% of the time over a 2-week stretch. Even Matt Shaw gets to levels and struggles like a lot. But then he, his adjustments are great. Triantos, like, I could see he's like one of those Cardinals infielders from the 2000s that just like hit 350 in their debut month like every year. Yeah, I think he would be my answer.
Yeah, Triantos is my answer. I think that multiple things, right? I think that like he fits the profile of a guy that holds his own as soon as he makes it up to Chicago and never struggles to the point where he deserves a demotion. And then also he's not 40-man eligible until next offseason, correct?
Right. Yep.
So then you can not call him up throughout this year. You can add him to the 40-man roster. You can he could stay in the minors for a while potentially. I think he could hit his way out of the minors, but I think there's a scenario where the Cubs keep him in the minors until like he is absolutely ready.
Yeah.
And so like then you're looking at a situation where he's ready for the bigs and he stays and he's good, even though even if he's not putting up all-star level numbers, like he just sticks around. So Triantos is actually my pick for that as well. So all right, we are pushing up on an hour, and we said we're going to do some pitching deep dives. I want to dig into Brandon Birdsell for sure.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can get some other guys, but Brandon Birdsell for sure deserves some chatter because he's looked really good, right? He got promoted up to AAA Iowa a few starts ago. We covered that on this show. But since then, he's kind of like, it's been fun digging into his numbers, not like how many strikeouts and walks and runs he's giving up, but the pitches that he's using, the fastball, the slider. He introduced a cutter this past week. What's your take on Brandon Birdsell in his time in Iowa?
Yeah, I guess his last start here, he won in Omaha. He pitched 6 innings, allowed 1 run, struck out 9 guys, which is the season high, I believe. Tied the season high.
Tied for the season high, yep.
And the really good thing is that he's touching 96 a lot more often than he was at other times this year. He's sort of always capable of going back and getting 96, but like I think it was often sort of 94 to 96, and now it's now it's sort of 95 to, have we seen 98 maybe? 97?
I don't know if we've seen 98. We've seen 97 though. We've seen multiple 97s.
And the cool thing about his numbers is like he's showing a 4-seam fastball that occasionally registers as having cut. So it's like technically sort of like you could call it a cutter sometimes at 95. But then you mentioned that he introduced a cutter this week, and it does sort of show up in the numbers. It's like a 89 to 91 mile per hour pitch that was showing like 4 inches of cut, which is it's too big of a difference to still be his 4-seam. But the funny thing about it, like it was registering on StatCast as a slider, but so are like pitches that he throws in the low 80s that sweep like maybe 10, 12 inches. And so if you look through the numbers of his last start, it's wild because he has pitches essentially from every velocity from 80 miles per hour to 91 miles per hour that are called sliders that have like varying degrees of horizontal movement and vertical movement. So he's very clearly sort of playing with shapes right now, but in a way that isn't like, it's not indecision. It's not, I don't really have it. I'm trying to find something that works. It really seems like there's sort of something deliberate there, and that he has like a feel for when to make it more firm and when to make it more loopy. And that's a really cool sign.
That is really a really unique skill to have because he's manipulating the ball in different ways. It is fastball, slider, cutter. Like those, he's not throwing a curveball. He's not
little change up.
Little change up. I think he's thrown like a couple each start, like maybe. But essentially it's fastball, slider, and I know and cutter this most recent week.
Yeah,
that I don't know. That's just not something that's going to be ever, in my opinion, be able to be like calculated. Right? Stuff plus models aren't going to calculate a guy's ability to continually manipulate a cutter into a slider, into a in between, into a cutter, into a fastball in between. Like that's not something that's going to be picked up. And that's just a super unique skill to have. And that is what's going to keep him in the rotation. I know that we've talked a lot about Brandon Birdsell. Like maybe like he's been a workhorse out of the rotation, like throwing 5 innings. He's thrown at least 5 innings in each of his starts dating back to May 25th outside of one. He's made one start of less than 5 innings dating back to May 25th. That's crazy. But with that being said, we kind of looked at like the fastball slider and said, oh, like that could play well in the pen. And the fastball at 96 might play up at 97 or 98, 99 if he's in the bullpen throwing 1 inning at a time. And like that's totally fair. I think he could do well in the bullpen. But like what's going to keep him in the rotation, in my opinion, is that ability to manipulate, even if he does only throw 2 pitches, 2.5 pitches, 2 solid ones, and then 2 half pitches. His ability to manipulate those and make those like 7 different pitches based on like the sliding scale that you're looking at is super, super important to me.
Yeah, the cool thing is like there's not a ton left in his like development in terms of going up the ladder, right? He's like having some success in AAA. He's not going to get added to the 40-man roster this year. Like it's going to go into next year. So he has all offseason knowing exactly where he's going to start next year. Like he will be in the Iowa rotation starting next year. And so he goes into this winter, I think, with such a leg up over most minor leaguers where like they don't know where they're going to be. They don't kind of know what their role is going to be, you know, what their team sort of wants them to work on. Like he's going to have such a clear development plan. So a really cool winter ahead for him to like really go improve one thing that makes it more likely that you be a starting pitcher. You'll have like 15 starts of runway in AAA next year where you won't be considered for a major league call-up. Like you have like a long time here to sort of explore the studio space of AAA. And I think like if he uses that to his advantage, it could be his chance to make it as a starter, where like if there was more urgency in his development, it would just be like, okay, like put him in the bullpen, see if the stuff pops. And then like you kind of become on that hamster wheel of like, it either works or it doesn't. Now you're on your next organization. Like he's built time for himself here. And I think he could weaponize that. And I think there's an argument that he's a top 15 for sure, but like top 12 prospect in the organization now.
I mean, I'd absolutely listen to I absolutely listen to top 12. I don't know that I would, but like I would rank him there, but like I might. I don't know. I might. Yeah, you're right.
He throws 96 and he didn't walk a single batter in June. Like, you know,
and
there's
he's in
not that
AAA.
many guys that do that. Yeah.
And you're right. Like he shot up through the system, and that was just so important for his development. It's interesting because like I think that it is totally fair and warranted for a prospect in his situation to be like, I'm ready to be called up right now. I'm ready. Like I want to compete for the Chicago rotation entering the 2025 season. It's totally fair. And honestly, that I want players to be thinking that. Like I want him to go in thinking there's a legitimate shot to win a rotation slot in Chicago starting next year. But you're right. The fact that he can fall back on like this long runway, like just perfect everything about your craft before you get called up in late 2025 or whenever it is. And like, yeah, weaponize that is the perfect way to describe that. You nailed that. It's crazy, right? It's crazy looking back on that 2022 draft and saying like Brandon Birdsell might make his debut before Cade Horton. That's crazy. That's wild.
That is crazy.
Although I don't know, I think maybe on draft day I might have said that though. On draft day, where you're getting Brandon Birdsell, a polished,
that is true,
Big 12 starting pitcher, and Cade Horton, who's a relative unknown, even though he's a first round draft pick. I probably would have bet on Brandon Birdsell back then, but then Cade Horton did his Cade Horton thing, and then I would have absolutely bet on Cade Horton, and now it's swung back to Brandon Birdsell. So I don't know, that's kind of fun. It's a fun. But yeah, watching him continue to develop and get quirkier and get more unique has been so fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of cool that he, you know, strikeout rate like per 9 innings in high A was 7.9. In double A, it moves up to 8.1. And so far in triple A, it's 9.6. So he is this rare example of somebody that's like, you know, the ERAs are also going up, but I think he has shown skill improvements at each level that really have increased the odds that he's going to be, you know, not just a major leaguer, but like more than a fringe major leaguer, like somebody that sticks. he's doing the right things. It's not the loudest profile of any prospect, but it's an effective prospect, and it's like legitimate depth where like, the Cubs can go into next year. Like that's one less AAA minor league veteran they have to sign this offseason.
Yep.
Because like they should feel comfortable that Brandon Birdsell can like throw 120 innings next year for AAA. And if they need somebody for a start, like he's got enough weapons to come up and spot start. So like that's what you want. Like that's real effective major league depth, and he's put himself in that position.
One last note on Brandon Birdsell. I think it's amazing that he's striking out more than a batter per inning, and he's also throwing more strikes than anyone in the system. His strike percentage is higher than anyone in the Cubs organization, as far as prospects go. Yeah. And that's an amazing combination. You don't see that very often. So as long as he limits the amount of hits that he's giving up, which he's struggling with a little bit in Iowa, as long as he limits the number of hits, then that's the name of the game right there. All right, man. I think we'll wrap it up there. I think we had other pitchers we want to talk about, but there's always next episode. There's always more guys to talk about next episode. So we're gonna wrap it up here. Where can people find you on social media and talking Cubs prospects?
Yeah, I feel like I'm using Twitter a little more often again, and we'll see, ups and downs on there. But at Cub Prospects on Twitter, and then if people want to see the deep dives that I've been doing recently, I drop them over on the 1060 West Discord. So check that out. And you never know what's in store for the off season, but we'll be here talking with Greg all through the off season, and starting to think about minor league prospect lists end of the year. And it's fun seeing these guys start to change the list. It felt like our midseason lists were like ripe for a couple breakouts and big reorganizations, and it's sort of the prime time where we're seeing that start to happen. So I'm excited to talk about those guys more.
I appreciate everybody tuning in. You can find me on Twitter at Out of the Vines. You can find me also over on the 1060 West Discord channel. You can find the podcast anywhere where you listen to podcasts. You can check us out on the North Side Bound YouTube channel. Really appreciated you guys tuning in there. Leave a like, leave a comment, leave a rating on all the different places. We really, really appreciate that. Go check out. I've got my interview posted as a separate video with Frankie Scalzo Jr. over on the North Side Bound YouTube channel, so go check that out. It's me looking super athletic in the Iowa Cubs bullpen, as you would expect. Really appreciate you guys tuning in. It's been terrific, and we'll be back in your ears in one short week. Thanks, guys.
Go Cubs.
Yeah.